the empire that nearly conquered the world and that nobody really knows about. While Rome was building its first roads, a colossal empire already dominated 3 continents. From Egypt to India, from Greece to the gates of China, Persia ruled over 44% of humanity. Cyrus the Great never lost a battle. Darius I created the first postal system in history. And yet, Hollywood sold you a completely fake version in 300. Today, we're debunking the myths and discovering the true history of the most underestimated empire of all time, Persia. Chapter 1. Persia, the Imperial Equation. Before empires could be ruled, they first had to be imagined. The Persian Empire was not merely the largest of the ancient world, it was the first to confront the sheer logistical terror of global rule. Others had conquered, the Assyrians with their calculated terror, the Sumerians within their river valley city-states. But Persia faced a problem of a different magnitude. Its territory was the known world, from the sun-baked Nile to the icy rivers of Scythia, from the Greek Isles to the dusty gates of India. This sprawl of continents contained the oldest, proudest, and most diverse civilizations on Earth. The pyramid builders of Egypt, the astronomer kings of Babylon, the philosophers and warriors of Greece, the wealthy merchants of Lydia. To conquer them was one thing, to administer them, to make the taxes flow, the roads bustle, and the peace hold from a single throne was an equation no one had ever solved. How could one king in a single palace govern this kaleidoscope of humanity? How could he rule Egyptians as pharaoh, Babylonians as the favorite of Marduk, and Greeks as a distant, powerful overlord, all at once? The answer was not found in a newer, sharper sword. It was found in a radical, unprecedented idea. Persia's genius was not simply to conquest, to rule, to power over people. The genius was in the administration. It pioneered a new logic of power, that to truly dominate the world, you cannot merge it into one and rule it. You must become its meticulous, tolerant, and supremely efficient manager. This was the birth of the imperial idea of governance, a first, very influential draft of how to run a planet. Chapter 2. The Covenant and the Machine. The Persian answer to the imperial equation had 2 parts, a revolutionary idea and a ruthless machine to enforce it. The idea belonged to Cyrus the Great. In 539 BCE, when his army stood before the mighty walls of Babylon, he did not prepare for a brutal siege in the style of the Assyrians. He executed a psychological masterstroke. Portrayed by the Babylonian priesthood as a liberator, he entered the city as a restorer. His genius is etched on the Cyrus cylinder. Unlike the boastful, terrorizing monuments of Assyria, this clay document was a foundational charter. It proclaimed the policy of pragmatic tolerance. Displaced peoples, like the Jews exiled by the Babylonians, were permitted to return to their homelands and worship their own gods. This was the radical covenant. The terms were simple and revolutionary. Pay your tribute, keep the peace. In return, you may keep your life, your culture, and your gods. It was a very different, and at those times surprisingly rational alternative to the costly, endless resistance that terror inspires. Cyrus provided the empire's soul. He ensured stability through calculated respect. But a covenant for millions required a system. This was the work of Darius I. He inherited the idea and built the machine. First, he divided the sprawl of conquest into over 20 manageable provinces, or satrapies. Each was governed by a royal appointee, the satrap, but Darius ingeniously separated powers. A separate military commander answered directly to the king, and royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, conducted surprise audits. This was a system designed to prevent rebellion through bureaucratic checks and balances. To bind this vast web together, he engineered its cardiovascular system, the Royal Road. Stretching 1,500 miles from the palace at Susa to Sardis on the Aegean coast, with way stations and fresh horses, it allowed royal messengers to traverse the empire in a week. Information, orders, and troops could move with unprecedented speed, making the theoretical reach of the king a physical reality. Finally, to fuel the machine, he created its lifeblood, standardized currency. The gold derrick and silver siglos, bearing the image of the royal archer, became the first universal imperial currency. It transcended local barter system, facilitating seamless trade and, most importantly, the efficient collection of taxes from Egypt to India. This was the true Pax Persica. It was not a passive peace. It was an actively manufactured order. Cyrus's covenant provided the reason for diverse peoples to accept Persian rule. Darius's machine provided the relentless, impersonal structure that made that rule function. Together, they formed the most successful governmental template the ancient world had ever seen. The empire now had its operating system. The next challenge would be branding it. Chapter 3: The Mask and the Crack. A system so vast could not run on bureaucracy alone. It required a grand, unifying spectacle, a mask of divine and unassailable power for the world to see. This mask was forged at Persepolis. Here on the Apollonian staircase, the empire's ideology was carved in stone. Delegations from all 23 nations, Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, are depicted not in chains, but in their native dress, bearing gifts. They are not conquered slaves. They are willing subjects in a cosmic hierarchy. At the top of this hierarchy stood the King of Kings, the title itself declaring his supremacy over all other rulers. This was the visual doctrine of the empire, a universal order, diverse yet unified, peaceful yet invincible, presided over by a monarch who was the agent of the supreme Zoroastrian god, Ahura Mazda. The policy of tolerance was the cornerstone of this mask, but it was not modern multiculturalism. It was a pragmatic divine mandate. As the chosen of Ahura Mazda, the King of Kings was tasked with upholding Asha, cosmic order, truth, against Druj, chaos, falsehood. Governing diverse peoples with a measure of justice was not kindness. It was a sacred duty essential to maintaining universal stability. Tolerance was the most sophisticated tool of control ever devised. But the first crack in this magnificent mask appeared at the empire's farthest, most restless fringe, the Greek cities of Ionia. When they revolted, it was a rebellion against a satrap, but also against the very logic of the imperial covenant. The Persian response under Darius I, a punitive expedition culminating at Marathon in 490 BCE, was meant to be a swift reassertion of order. Instead, it became a shock. The hoplites of Athens did not just win a battle, they shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. The machine had encountered a resistance its psychology could not absorb. The crack became a chasm under Darius' son Xerxes. Where Cyrus and Darius were architects, Xerxes was an inheritor consumed by the spectacle of his own power. His invasion of Greece in 480 BCE was an act of monumental hubris. It was a personal quest for vengeance and glory that overrode the system's foundational logic. He corrupted the covenant, exchanging calculated tolerance for a desire for total submission. Ensuing defeats at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale were more than military losses. They were systemic failures. At Salamis, the immense, top-heavy royal fleet was outmaneuvered in narrow waters by agile, motivated Greek triremes. At Plataea, the grand imperial army, stretched across an overlong supply line and riven by command rivalries, was stopped by a cohesive coalition. The machine, so brilliant at administering peace, proved lethally inflexible in the face of chaotic, determined resistance. The mask of divine, orderly inevitability had slipped, revealing for the first time that the empire could be broken. The flaw was not in the machine's design, but in the hand now on the lever. Chapter 4: The Hollow Empire and Its Long Shadow. The crack became a rot that spread inward for 150 years. The empire did not crumble from its edges, but from the decay of its own brilliant system. The first failure was bureaucratic. The satrapal system, designed to prevent rebellion, became its engine. Satrapies turned into hereditary fiefdoms. Provincial armies became personal retinues loyal to local warlords, not the King of Kings. The eyes and ears of the king, the fearless inspectors, went blind, either bribed into silence or too afraid to report the truth. The immense, once loyal administrative machine fractured into a collection of self-interested, competing power centers. This disease infected the very heart of power, the throne itself. The sacred monarchy, meant to be the universe's stabilizing pivot, became its most volatile prize. A grim cycle of palace coups, poisonings, and fratricidal wars consumed the royal house. The crown, symbol of divine order, was now won through the darkest chaos. Each new king, often a minor prince raised by scheming eunuchs or generals, was weaker, more isolated, and less legitimate than the last. By the time of Darius III, the empire was a hollow colossus. The roads, the titles, and the ceremonies remained, magnificent and imposing, but the unifying ideology was dead, the covenant of tolerance broken, replaced by hollow ritual and desperate extraction. The empire was no longer a governed world. It was merely a vast treasure to be plundered, waiting for a force strong enough to topple its brittle shell. That force was Alexander of Macedon. His conquest was not a slow fade, but a brilliant, violent shattering. Yet, to say Alexander destroyed Persia is to miss the profound truth. He did not erase it. He consumed and emulated it. Upon taking the throne, he deliberately stepped into the Persian mold. He adopted the title Shahanshah, King of Kings, wore the hybrid royal diadem, and retained the satrapal system to administer his new domains. His dream of fusing Greek and Persian cultures was in essence the ultimate validation of the Persian imperial idea, the administration of a diverse global realm from a single centralized throne. Persia's true legacy, therefore, is not its fall, but its indelible template, its model: standardized administration, infrastructural integration, and pragmatic tolerance as statecraft became the ghost in the machine of every empire that followed. Rome's provinces and postal system, Byzantium's bureaucracy, even the administrative dreams of modern nations operate in the long shadow cast by the palace at Persepolis. They built the first and most enduring framework for ruling a world. Every subsequent empire has been, in some inescapable way, a footnote to their original, monumental draft of power. Chapter 5: The Inherited Lie. We have seen the empire, its revolutionary covenant of tolerance under Cyrus, its brilliant binding machinery of roads and satrapies under Darius, its prosperous multi-ethnic peace, a system so effective it governed nearly half of humanity. This is an empire that can have hours upon hours of documentaries that would only scratch the surface. But this presents a profound paradox. If this was the reality of Persia, why is our dominant memory so different? If your personal memory or learning experience on Persia is different, you are most likely from a Western country. This is because Persians were instinctively pictured as snarling immortals, a god-king empire with one man on a golden throne and a faceless tide of tyranny destined to break against a wall of 300 half-naked, ultra-masculine Spartans. The answer is found on the stages of Athens and 2 millennia later on our own movie screens. Our story of Persia was written by its greatest rivals and then stylized by our own Hollywood mythmakers. That iconic image from 300 of a Spartan boot poised to kick a robed Persian emissary into a bottomless well is not an invention of modern cinema. It is the hypersaturated flourish on a 2,500-year-old piece of Greek wartime propaganda. We have allowed the ancient Greeks to be our primary, often our only, narrators for the Persian Empire. And for Greece, Persia was not a complex state. It was the essential other, the monolithic enemy against which they defined their own emerging identity of freedom and reason. The story we inherited is, in large part, brilliant spin. The slow-motion violence and monstrous imagery of 300 are merely the latest, most vivid chapter in a very old story. This inherited bias inverts the world. Consider the foundations of these rival civilizations. The leisure that enabled Athenian philosophers like Aristotle and Plato to sit and debate the nature of the ideal state was underwritten by a brutal system of chattel slavery. Almost every public work, every mine, every wealthy Athenian household rested on this foundation. In contrast, the monumental terraces of Persepolis were built by paid laborers. The Persian state issued standardized coinage partly to pay its workers. The empire that Greece painted as despotic was, in this critical sphere, more humane in its practice. Look at the imperial models. Persia's villainy was a system that granted conquered peoples their local laws, their faiths, and their languages, demanding only tribute and peace. Greece's freedom was often, for those outside the polis, a harsh reality of subjugated colonies and a worldview that branded non-Greeks as barbaroi, literally, those who babble, inherently inferior and unfit for self-rule. And finally, look at their worlds through the eyes of half their population. In Persia, women like the formidable merchant Irdabama could amass vast wealth, own property, and manage complex business empires. In Athens, the cradle of democracy, women were legal non-persons under the law of Pericles, unable to own significant property or participate in the civic life their male counterparts so celebrated. Aristotle himself wrote that women were defective by nature, lacking the rational capacity for full citizenship. This Greek narrative was not neutral history. It was the victor's story. And this story was then adopted, amplified, and set in stone by their greatest admirers, the Romans, who saw themselves as the heirs to Greek culture, and later by Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers who constructed Western civilization with Greece and Rome as its pure classical foundation. Persia, by then under the veil of Islam and later a modern geopolitical rival, was conveniently cast in the role it had played for Athens and for Leonidas' Spartan, the eternal Oriental despotism, a foil, a symbol of decadence and tyranny against which the West could define its own legacy of liberty and progress. So, we remember Alexander the Great for conquering Persia, but we forget what he conquered. He did not destroy the Persian system, he enthusiastically adopted it. Yes, it was a smart maneuver, but he obeyed by the principles he saw and learned there. He kept their traditions, he kept their infrastructure, and that is why he had the luxury of ruling such vast lands. He took the title of Shahanshah, wore the diadem, and kept the satrapal administration intact. He proved that to rule the world, you use the Persian blueprint. The Persian Empire did not disappear. Its physical dominion fell, but its ghost lingered. In the administrative dreams of Rome, in the tolerant policies of distant empires, in the very idea that a state could be more than just an engine of plunder and coercion. It was the first and one of the greatest drafts of how to run a world. Our failure to see it clearly is not a minor oversight in history. It is a testament to the power of the stories we choose to tell, and a reminder that the most enduring conquest is not of land, but of memory.